We start today with President Joe Biden's speech in Warsaw, Poland. This is a speech that the president gave after his visit to Ukraine. This is a visit in general, and also in particular, a speech that has really exposed the worst of the authoritarian right wing in the United States. And one of the fascinating things, as we're going to look at some clips here of this speech that President Biden gave, President Biden focused in on a criticism of autocrats and authoritarians. Overtly, he's talking about Vladimir Putin. But when you listen to the criticism, this would just as accurately apply to the authoritarian, autocratic, dictatorial wannabe MAGA right of the United States. Joe Biden was super strong in this speech. Let's take a look at this first section about autocracy and the importance of opposing it anywhere that we see it.
President Putin's craven lust for land and power will fail, and the Ukrainian people's love for their country will prevail. Democracies of the world will stand guard over freedom today, tomorrow, and forever. So that's what's at stake here. Freedom. That's the message I carried to Kyiv yesterday, directly to the people of Ukraine. When President Zelensky said he came to the United States in December, quote, he said, "This struggle will define the world and what our children and grandchildren, how they live, and then their children and grandchildren." He wasn't only speaking about the children and grandchildren of Ukraine. He was speaking about all of our children and grandchildren, yours and mine. We're seeing again today what the people of Poland and the people across Europe saw for decades. Appetites of the autocrat cannot be appeased. They must be opposed. Autocrats only understand one word: no, no, no. No, you will not take my country. No, you will not take my freedom. No, you will not take my future. And I'll repeat tonight what I said last year in this same place. A dictator bent on rebuilding an empire will never be able to ease the people's love of liberty. Brutality will never grind down the will of the free. And Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia. Never.
So one of Biden's strongest speeches, and of course, he doesn't write these, he puts his touch on them, but he's not writing these speeches. But the message, as much as it here is designed for Putin, it could go for Orban, it could go for Trump, it could go for the former Brazilian president, Jair Bolsonaro. All of these autocrats have this wannabe dictator streak. And what is stunning is that even though the right has claimed a monopoly on freedom and liberty in the United States for, at this point, probably 2 decades, it is increasingly the right that wants to restrict freedoms of all sorts of kinds. What can we teach? What can we say? What can social media companies do? What can other private industries do? What can people do in their bedroom? What pronouns can people choose to be called by? Right? Increasingly, it's the Democratic Party, of which I am not a part, as many of you know. I have no particular concern with the Democratic Party, but this happens to be a Democratic president who is actually the one talking about freedom and liberty in a more serious way. Joe Biden continued and said that, well, let's just listen. He addressed the Ukrainian conflict specifically.
The United States, together with our allies and partners, are going to continue to have Ukraine's back as it defends itself. Next year, I will host every member of NATO for our 2024 summit in the United States. Together, we'll celebrate the 75th anniversary of the strongest defensive alliance in the history of the world, NATO. And let there be no doubt, the commitment of the United States to our NATO alliance and Article 5 is rock solid.
So there can be reasonable and spirited debate as to how large should the American contribution to Ukraine be? How long-lasting should the commitment be? And is it fair or reasonable for the United States to be disproportionately supporting Ukraine in comparison to other allied countries? All of those are reasonable conversations. But what Joe Biden distilled clearly in this speech is something that it's shocking people still have to be reminded of it. And I know they do, because Vladimir Putin recently said in his address something along the lines of the U.S. started this war, or Ukraine started this war. It wasn't Russia who started the war. Russia started the war. This is a defensive situation for Ukraine, and Joe Biden doing a good job of pointing that out. And then going further in terms of what the U.S. and Western allies are seeking and what they are not seeking.
So tonight, I speak once more to the people of Russia. The United States and the nations of Europe do not seek to control or destroy Russia. The West was not plotting to attack Russia, as Putin said today.
Right.
And millions of Russian citizens who only want to live in peace with their neighbors are not the enemy. This war is never a necessity. It's a tragedy. President Putin chose this war. Every day the war continues is his choice. He could end the war with a word. It's simple. If Russia stopped invading Ukraine, it would end the war. If Ukraine stopped defending itself against Russia, it would be the end of Ukraine. That's why together we're making sure Ukraine can defend itself.
Yeah. And again, it is stunning that this has to be repeated. You can still make the case that despite it being a defensive situation for Ukraine, the U.S.'s involvement should have limits. That's a perfectly reasonable conversation to have. I don't know of anyone on the left who is saying that these are unlimited blank checks for the end of time. That is not what I'm hearing anybody saying. If somebody is saying that, please let me know. But the context and the circumstances in which this is happening must be restated regularly, because there is a propaganda effort from Putin and from others to pretend that the circumstances are different. Let's next talk about how this entire Ukraine visit has broken the brains of many right-wingers. One of our sponsors is Zippix nicotine toothpicks. Don't you think it's time you stopped putting smoke and vape oils in your lungs? Zippix toothpicks are a convenient way to curb the nicotine cravings. Zippix toothpicks are super discreet. You can use them anytime, anywhere smoking and vaping aren't allowed, including flights, sporting events, in restaurants. They're available in 6 different flavors with options of 2 and 3 milligrams of nicotine. If you're not a nicotine user, Zippix also offers caffeine and B12 infused toothpicks. Zippix has already helped tens of thousands of customers ditch the cigarettes, ditch the vapes. They might be able to help you too. If you're a smoker or a vapor, give Zippix toothpicks a try. Your lungs will thank you. Go to zippixtoothpicks.com today. Save 10% with the code PACMAN10 at checkout. Just remember, you must be 21 or older to order. The link is down below.